So, can you all hear me? Just to check again.
Audio is perfectly fine.
Okay, so I guess I want to run this as a bit of a interactive thing, really, where people ask me questions, because I'm very good at going off on a monologue, and that's not particularly useful for people trying to understand what's going on. So this is Rtsim2. Let's just let's just get this all compiling. So Rtsim2 is a new system in the game that has its own crate. So you can see it here. And the purpose of Rtsim2, or well, let's just call it Rtsim now because it has actually replaced the old one. The purpose of it is to simulate the game world in real time, even in unloaded chunks. So every chunk of the world is being simulated as the game runs. So it's built as a separate crate because it's meant to be kind of a little isolated from the main game, in the sense that it's possible to run Rtsim completely independently of the main game. So you don't need to be using a server, for example. And I imagine in the future we might have something more akin to like the Legends Explorer, Legends Viewer into Dwarf Fortress, that allows you to run a simulation of the world and then take a look at it and inspect it, or maybe make changes to it, or generally play around with it in a context that isn't the main game. I imagine that some people will be talking. Yeah. Hey. Okay. Cool. So yeah. We start off in lib.rs, as everything does. Rtsim is a library crate, obviously. That means it's depended on by other parts of the game. So you can see it's a dependency of the server crate right here. And everything is basically contained within this big struct called RT_state. This is the God struct, I guess, that contains everything. It contains all of Rtsim's state, basically. And how exactly it does that is not too relevant. It's kind of ECS-like, but you don't usually care about that when making use of it. But the important thing is that Rtsim is composed of rules. So rules are pieces of independent modular code that run in response to various events. So you can kind of imagine them almost like mods, I guess, in a way, in the sense that you can build them up, and the idea is that people will be able to come along and add their own rules and work on rules in a relatively independent manner without causing lots of merge conflicts or whatever. We'll see how well that plays out in practice. So let's take a look at one of the rules. Actually, first of all, let's just give a demo of what it can do. I'll have to wait for this to compile. So we'll take a look at the migration rule first, which is a rule that runs when Rtsim starts, basically. So I said that Rtsim rules run in response to events. So what you can do is, in the start method, you implement the rule trait for your rule. You can bind to a particular event So in this case, this is the setup event, which runs exactly once at the beginning of the simulation starting. That can also mean the simulation resuming from like a shutdown state. But in general, that sort of corresponds with the server starting up. And the purpose of this rule, basically, well, you can read it here, but the purpose of it, actually let me make this a bit larger. The purpose of it is to go through all of the existing data in Rtsim that was saved from the last time, compare it with all of the data that we have from initial world generation, and if there are mismatches between the two, it tries to kind of align them a bit. It's a little botchy, really. It's very much a bit of a hope and pray type approach, in the sense that if there are two sites that have a similar position, it will try to translate one site to another. You can see also if NPCs end up being in a site that was deleted, then we basically just reassign them to the nearest site, which is very simple logic, and I'm sure we'll want to improve this later by adding some way of tracking the faction, for example, of an NPC, and making sure they don't go to a site that hates them, for example. But that's an example of one rule. Let me just let's take a look at what it can do then. I've kind of demoed this in the past, but let's do it again just for the sake of explaining things. So let's find a town. This one looks... actually, let's go for this one. Site. Azolen. So we have a town here, as you can see. Oh, okay, well, there's things going on already. That's mostly unrelated to Rtsim, though. That's just the NPCs behaving as they did before. But Rtsim basically acts as a layer on top of the normal actions you see in game. So, for example, you can have NPCs that perform actions like talking to each other and so on, or generally just take more long-term actions than would be typical of a normal entity. So if we wait for a moment, we'll be able to see some NPCs talking to each other. There we go. And that is all controlled by Rtsim. They'll also talk to me as well. Rtsim also considers players to be actors, so sort of NPC-like things. And all of those interactions are going on in there. So quite a lot of this logic occurs in the NPC AI rule. Now this rule is quite large at this point. It probably needs to be made a lot more modular. But if we go down to the start of the definition, we can see that we're binding to this on-tick event. So all of this code is being run on every tick, and currently a tick corresponds to a server tick, so 30 of them a second. But what we pretty much do is we go through each of the NPCs, we take a look at their mode. Mode basically means whether they are simulated, which means they're inside a chunk that is unloaded, for example, or whether they are loaded, which is whether they're in-game. And we only really want to apply certain kinds of logic if the NPC is not loaded. So we go through and we run this interesting thing here, which is think.repeat. So think.repeat is sort of the master code that controls the NPC behavior as a whole. We've got this abstraction here called action. It's a trait actually, but what this allows us to do, this action trait, let me go to the definition of it, is it allows us to build up actions that the NPC performs, and an action is implemented by a long-running action. So you might have, for example, go to a particular position. That's an action, and actions can take many ticks to execute. They might take even sort of days in game to execute, or they might just be a momentary thing that executes in a single tick. The point is that this is able to represent all of those different cases, ideally anyway. So actions are built up using what's called a combinator API. So if you've used the iterator API in Rust, you'll be kind of familiar with how this works. So you can do things like let me see. You can do things like map an action. So you take the output of an action, i.e., whether the action was successful or not, for example, and you do something to that data. You can also combine actions. For example, you can use then to perform a single action and then also another action. So you can see in the example here, we're first going to the location of an enemy, and then we're attacking the enemy. So those are two different actions that get combined together to create a larger action. So you can see how you can kind of compose actions in a way that's fairly modular. You can also repeat them. So there are quite a few cases of this in the AI code. Let's find a good example. So here, for example, we have an idle action, and we repeat that action, i.e. repeat it indefinitely, until this particular condition is met, i.e. a timeout is met. So that's going to cause us to idle for 4 seconds and then continue on our way, basically. So this is actually the code that controls how long an NPC is going to talk to you when they decide to interact with you. So let me wait for an NPC to interact with me. Come on. And we'll be able to see it takes 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they go off. So that's an example of that in use. Let me check, see if there are questions. No questions. So for those that have worked on the existing AI code, you'll know it's quite difficult to program in long-running actions. The existing AI code, the agent code, is extremely reactive. So it will react to a certain event, like me doing that. But in order for the NPC to maintain some long-term state, for example, aggro, we need to store that state, and storing that state ends up being pretty messy, really, and it results in and it results in agent struct. It's here somewhere. Containing quite a few different fields that try to represent this state. For example, we have the target, which is used to store the current entity that has aggro. And also, interestingly, it stores things like the owner of a pet, or it stores the NPC that a merchant is trading with. So it's got kind of a dual use, and the reason for this dual use is that it's quite annoying to store this kind of long-term state, and so we tend to duplicate everything. And this comes with a lot of complications and kind of can create a lot of bugs. So there was a case a while ago where if you repeatedly tried to trade with an NPC at the same time as attacking them, they wouldn't attack back because they were going into a trade state, and that trade state was overriding the aggro state because it was using the target field. So the goal with Rtsim really is to avoid all of this sort of independence between state and reaction, and to encode it all in like a combinator type API that makes working with it a lot easier. We can still react to things, so we have, for example, this choose combinator here, this choose action, and choose basically allows us to implement a decision tree. So you can see here we've got an if here. We're making a decision based on a particular piece of logic, and if that logic is true, then we do this logic, this action, or otherwise we do this other one. And you can basically build up arbitrarily complicated pieces of behavior, but do so in a modular way that means that it's quite easy to add new behaviors without breaking existing ones. So if we go back down to the think function, you can see that we're calling out to two different functions here depending on the body of the NPC. So obviously if the NPC is a bird, we don't want to be pretending that we're a human and going around to villages and trying to trade or chatting with the locals or something. That's not really bird behavior. So we go into this bird action here, and that pretty much just flies around the world and does bird things, bird-brained stuff. But the humanoid one is a bit more interesting because it actually calls out to lots of different actions based on what's going on. So if an NPC is riding a vehicle, we actually execute this particular action, which causes us to go off and try to fly around between sites, for example. Or if we're either a merchant or an adventurer, we go off and perform an adventure action. And this adventure action is a very long-running thing. In fact, it pretty much runs for the entire lifetime of the NPC. And this basically involves travelling between sites and then waiting a little at the site and interacting with people. We also have a villager action, which is also a long-running thing. Where is that? Yeah, that's up here. So you can see it's got its own logic. If we go back down to villager here. Yeah, and we've also got this interesting case here where we want to interrupt an action with another action. So the react events in this case is basically an action that goes through all of the events that have happened nearby the NPC and decides to take action. So for example, if we do something pretty horrible in this site, like for example we kill an NPC, a second, like this, all of those nearby will witness that and will start reacting accordingly. They don't like me now, very much so. Let's hide up here for a moment. But this all happens through this reaction action here. That rhymes, I'm a poet, I didn't know it. And one of the reactions we do is we check for nearby enemies. So Enemies are other actors, so NPCs or players that we have a negative sentiment toward. So you can see that check occurring here. I realise I'm glossing over a lot of details here. This is not meant to be a here's how to exactly do this or that.
Is all the boxing I just saw really necessary?
There is some of it that is a bit redundant, but I think in this case, this is a long-running action, so it doesn't matter too much here. There are other cases where they could be
I just noticed
removed for sure.
Every single input.
Yeah, and so we also implement. Where am I? We also implement action for either. So that's an alternative to boxing that we can use. So in theory, we could do something like either left here. Do a nested one because there are 3 of them.
Yeah, maybe a macro.
Yeah, there are various options, but that's the main reason for not doing that so far. And that will still work. Oh, maybe not. Oh, did I accidentally paste something? I did. Yeah, so point is it doesn't require boxing, that's just a thing I've done at the moment, mainly for convenience. Let's reconnect once this is recompiled. What am I doing now? So sentiments was a thing I was mentioning, so various things in Rtsim can hold a sentiment to another thing. So a sentiment is currently basically just a value that tells us how positive we feel towards it. This may change in the future. For example, we could have some sort of measure of trust, for example. But at the moment it's just a linear value basically. So our sentiment towards things can change in accordance to various actions. So going back into the NPC code for a moment. We have it down here. Yeah, here. So here in the code that checks our inbox on a regular basis, if we witness a murder, we basically change our sentiment toward the killer by a certain amount. So we have this sentiment value here, which is villain. Sorry, ignore me. Yeah, so we change it by a certain amount. At the moment it's basically hard-coded, but at some point obviously we'll probably want to change that. But as we change the sentiment, it means that the NPCs will start to react in certain ways. As we can see down here in the check for enemies code that we mentioned earlier. There's not a huge amount to say about this code really, except from sentiment can be aimed at a variety of things. So you can have a sentiment towards a faction, towards an NPC, towards a character. It might be possible that we could add more in the future, like a sentiment towards a species of animal, or a kind of food, or various other things. But at the moment it's just things that are a bit easier to conceptualize. Let's go back to that site. So the fact that actions are okay, they're still very much angry at me. So the fact that actions, let me hide so I don't get pings of arrows as they try to kill me. The fact that actions are long running and are composed in this way makes it quite easy to add new actions. So, for example, we can make a change to these actions. Let's see. Let's go into the villager code. So, the villager code down here calls socialize, which is an action that, as you might guess, makes the villagers do various idle things. So let's make a change to this. What we're going to do is maybe instead of dancing on occasion, we're going to make the NPCs. What are we going to make them do? Now I've got to think of something. This is hard. Waving. We don't currently have waving as an action plugged in to lower down in the agent code. But I can make them say something. So if we go to the controller struct, where is it? How did it move? It moved. Where did it move to? Later. Oh no, it didn't move. I'm just managing to forget where it was. So we can say something instead. Let's say. So we're not going to say our words to anyone in particular. But we can say, for example, hello world, and then after that we're going to make them say something else. However, we're going to notice some slightly odd behaviour if we recompile this. It's going to take a while. We're going to notice some odd behaviour in that this action just runs in a single tick. Okay, so it's used for example, emitting a certain event in an instantaneous manner, and then we're going to emit another event, and it's probably going to keep on looping back between these because the socialize event is repeated, as you can see here. Let's take a look at that. Change my waypoint. That's, I can't remember what it was called. Oh, actually, I shouldn't go to this town. They don't like me here. Let's go to another one. There we go. Okay, so we can see that the behaviour has changed, and saying the stuff that we told them to say. Not sure why they're not doing it more, to be honest, although I guess it's only happening from time to time. But we're mostly only seeing the how are you because they immediately say another thing. So let's add a bit of weighting here. So we're going to idle. Oh, it's stopped off, isn't it? Idle for 2 seconds after saying hello. And then we're going to idle for 4 seconds after saying how are you. Take a look and see if this works. Oh, done. This is a slight quirk that I'm not going to go into right now. We need to repeat idle, because otherwise it'll just happen once and then never again. Yeah, need to map. This API is probably going to be changing at some point, so this isn't necessary. Just kind of ignore it for now. What have I done? Oh, am I accidentally... So we've got a just in here, a just in there. Then we've got idle. Where's that not working? Now. Or maybe we need to add this down here. It's quite a lot harder to program when you're trying to think on your toes. Yeah, so in response to XMAC in the chat, yeah, so currently sentiment is only held by NPCs, but the plan long term would be to also have a faction sentiment, and maybe to have NPCs pass on or take on a sentiment when they're in an area that's controlled by their faction. So for example, if you attack someone out in the wilderness, they will start to dislike you, or maybe something else like you steal something, they will start to dislike you, and they'll pass that on to those that are in their faction as well. And then maybe factions even pass on the sentiment between factions, but obviously we wouldn't want that to turn into a runaway type effect. So we'd have to be careful with balancing that. Let's see, these ones are just walking around for now. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I'm not interested in cheese at the moment. You gonna say anything? No. Made it a bit more likely to happen. Okay, well you're dancing, which is fine I guess, but oh, there we go. And now we had the gap between the actions that lasted 2 seconds, as you can see. So yeah, that's just a demo of how relatively easy it is to start to piece things together and build up long-running behaviours. You can imagine, for example, adding a whole sort of branch of NPC behaviour that goes off and travels to a site and maybe raids a dungeon, for example, and that would all be contained within a single action that's built up out of lots of different and smaller steps. Yeah, so the Rust docs are actually hosted for this on docs.veloren.net. So we can see the action trait here, and the examples are not amazing, but they give a sense of what you can do with it, and how all of the different combinators interact. I'll just put that in the chat. Not really sure what to talk about at this point. There's quite a lot of other stuff to talk about when it comes to Rtsim, but it's too much to cover in just a single hour, really. Does anybody have any particular questions or things that they're particularly interested in hearing about? Future goals. That's kind of unbounded, really. I think there's quite a lot we can do with this. We can definitely add in some rather complicated behaviours, and we've kind of shown that already. Quite a few of the NPC behaviours are now pretty complicated. For example, we have NPCs that will go and hunt animals, for example, if they're a hunter, or herbalists will try to gather things in the forest. Well, at the moment, that's just implemented as dancing, admittedly. But let me find a hunter. We've also got a series of commands that quite easily allow you to find NPCs now that fit a particular category. 581. That's apparently a hunter. Oh no, it's in the town where they hate me. No, why? Okay, let's try another one. Let's try someone all the way across the other side of the world or something. Here we go. You're a hunter, and you're not currently hunting. You're socializing. Okay, that's not useful. There we go. I think you're probably or are you? I don't know. Let's test that by spawning some rabbits. No, you're not. Oh, yep. So hunters will now try to hunt quadrupeds that are wild. This is terrible. What happened? Oh, the NPC probably heard a report of me killing someone previously, maybe. Actually, I'm not sure. There'll be another report that they received or something like that. Anyway, hunters will tend to walk between areas of woodlands and will try to seek out wild animals to hunt, and that's all encapsulated in this action here. Programs swarm-like behaviours. Yeah, I imagine so. I mean, a fairly easy thing to do there would be to designate a single NPC as a leader, for example, and have the rest of them just attempt to follow. That would be probably relatively inexpensive. Moving NPCs in a straight line is extremely cheap in Rtsim, so you can just have a single NPC that does all the pathfinding, then the rest just try to follow along afterwards. Yeah, that's a good point. The resource depletion code. So Rtsim also tracks the resources that are available in each chunk. So if we go into nature.rs, we have a grid of chunks which corresponds to each of the chunks in the world, and we have this map of resources. So this chunk resource enum has a few values that correspond to all of the sprites we have. So when you mine a sprite, it actually depletes the resource out of the chunk, and we track the percentage of that resource that's actually available in that chunk, and that means that we can reduce it over time as people mine things, and we can also replenish it too. And it means that we don't get a situation where it's really easy to gain resources by reloading a chunk, and that also leads to extra things as well. So where previously, because it was so easy to gain a resource by reloading a chunk, we couldn't really have persistent resources or large groups of resources, because you could just reload them and farm the area. But now we can actually have those things deplete as you mine them, and so we can have things like large ore veins, for example, and we don't need to worry about them being exploited by players reloading chunks. Anything else anybody's interested in? Mainly I'm just trying to give people a sense that this stuff is relatively approachable and that it's actually really fun to work on, and that you too should play around with it, and try to get it to do interesting things. Where's our code here? What else can we make it do? I can't think of anything on the top of my head at the moment, but it's fairly easy to read code, I think. Quite a lot of it is just, for example, finding a site that fits a criteria, walking towards the site, and then performing an action there, in the case of an adventurer. So the interesting thing is that the adventure action actually calls out to the villager action. So when an adventurer is in a town, they will actually pretend to be a villager and take on all of the behaviours of a villager. I don't know to what extent that's going to be desirable long term. It might be that we want to specialise their behaviour a bit, but it's just an interesting thing that shows that you can actually nest all of these behaviours inside each other, and build up more complicated ones out of simpler parts. Quite an interesting one actually is this travel to site action, which makes NPCs walk using the paths. So let me search for a traveller, and you travelling? No, I'm not travelling at the moment. Are you travelling? Yeah, you're travelling. There we go. You're not on a path, so you're not really a brilliant example. It's probably that they're trying to get between sides that didn't have a path. Or this one too. I'm not travelling. You're not travelling. They spend a lot of time just waiting around in sites. You're swimming and attacking fish. Nice. You're also swimming. Okay, well this is rather annoying. Maybe I should scroll up and find some that are a little closer to where I was before. Oh, come on, you're not travelling to... I've got to find somebody that's travelling. I'm just going to give up in a moment. Yeah. It's a bit annoying really because the wait time is basically up to a quarter of an hour, which is quite a long time to be waiting, but that's fine. But yeah, the idea is that this travel to site action actually does quite a lot of complicated pathfinding or whatever internally, and yet it's really easy to invoke because we're able to compose actions out of other actions. Another really interesting thing you can do, because actions are built up in a modular way, we can actually attach debugging information to an action, and it might not be initially clear exactly what this is doing, but it means that, for example, here and here, it means that if we take a look at an NPC, let's say, actually let's find an NPC. Let's go to a random NPC. There we go. If we do rtsim info, we can actually get a bit of a backtrace as to what the NPC is doing at the current moment. So we can see that they're currently a villager in a site. If I do it, and then there. It says they're waiting in a house. I think that was probably that they were waiting in this workshop, which to them looks like a house. And they probably wandered out of it, and so it still thinks it's waiting in a house. But you can see that they're doing a variety of actions. If we make it day, so they're no longer going to sleep, you can see that currently they're walking to a plaza, so walking to a town square. And as part of that, they're travelling to a particular point. Once they've got there, as they have now, we can see that they're no longer travelling and they're just waiting there. So that makes it extremely easy to debug what's actually going on inside the mind of an NPC. Makes it really easy to work out whether logic is going wrong or why they're behaving in a certain way, which has been a big help when working on this. Yeah, I mean, everything becomes compiler development eventually, right? Yeah. I think long term the system is probably going to evolve beyond what's here, but that evolution can only occur if people interact with it and start building things with it and start finding its weaknesses, its strengths, and finding ways to improve it. So yeah. Any questions? Or anything you want to see, or anything you're interested in hearing about? I know a lot of the code is a bit dense, and as I was scrolling past it very quickly, it might seem a bit confusing, but there's really not all that much to all of the logic. It's very much, if this condition, then do this condition, and it makes it a lot easier than trying to track a decision tree with external state, which is a common thing to do in the current AI code. Airships, yes. So airships no longer move on their own accord now. Airships are controlled by the NPC riding them. So it's if we go down to, you can see here, if an NPC is riding a vehicle, and that vehicle is an airship, we go into the pilot action, and the pilot action basically just chooses sites in the world, and then flies towards them, and once it gets there it chooses another site. Of course it goes around again, and so we get this sort of behaviour that's very similar to the old code, except it's all contained within this one function here. So let's find a pilot. What is the what's the it's common. What's the profession of? Oh, is it just captain, or is it pirate? It might be pirate. I'm not sure. Let's try pirate. No pirates? Okay. Are there... Oh, we have cultists as well. I'm not sure whether we use that or not. We might use it. Captain. Okay, we have a few captains. Deity. That's interesting. Actually, maybe we can teleport to them like that. Oh, okay. That's not a great example. Why are you underground, mate? What's going on there? They like being underground at the moment. I think maybe there's a fix to this I've not pulled or something like that. Something to look into. Hey, that one's not underground. There. So we can see. Some speed. It's quite difficult to climb up. So you can see that the airship is now controlled by the captain, and I'll talk to you as well. The hitbox isn't actually where the NPC is, because we're moving very quickly and there's a lot of interpolation going on, but that's an unrelated thing. I think if we then go and kill them, in fact I'm not sure we can actually. Yeah, they've got an invincibility tab up on for now, because players kept on murdering them and airships kept on falling out of the sky. But yeah, that's that. Hot reloading. Yeah, I imagine that it would be really easy to add hot reloading to this. I've just not done it yet. Trivially easy, in fact, I imagine. We could probably do the same thing for rules in general, to be honest. I'll have to think about that. questions or things people are interested to see? Change the course of the airships. Yeah, I mean, you could do that by just making a change to this code here. If you wanted to have like a regular airship route or something like that, like a timetabled airship route, you could do that here. Or I imagine you could generalize this code to, for example, trains or something like that. Yeah, I'd be really interested to see what people come up with here. I think there's quite a lot of opportunities for long-term events in the world. So for example, you could have a cultist invasion. Cultists will actually follow their leader and explore the world and try to raid towns on a regular basis, and we'll do it in a way that's a bit less random and gives players a way to interact with that. And all of that would be relatively simple. You know, we've already got a way to go to a particular location or travel to sites and so on. Jump and glide around the world. Sure. Get some Aurora. Drop a cheese in there. Wait a second, I'm going to try this. Oh, yes, yes, it wants the flute. Oh, that's not good, that's not good, that's not good. Down we go. We bounced off the ocean. That's so janky. So now it's just trying to endlessly chase this item by moving towards it, but the item is moving with the airship. So it's like it's trying to chase its own tail. That's so silly. We're going up very, very quickly because my camera's completely screwed. Yes. Donkey with a carrot is more appropriate, yeah. Oh. Fell through. Oh well. Yeah. Anything else that people are interested in hearing about? Let me just go through and think. Any interesting rules? So we also have a system called reports, which is when events occur in the world, NPCs can communicate those events to each other. So those events are called reports. At the moment, I believe there's only a single kind of report. Where is it? Yeah. That report is the death of an actor. So an actor being either an NPC or a player. It can also be a murder if there's a killer, but that will be acted on by the NPC code in the check-in box action here. So you can see that we pull events out of the inbox, and then we act on those. So if the report is a death, we change the sentiment. I think I went over this before. Reports will be remembered by NPCs and passed around them. So for example, if you kill an NPC and there's a witness and you manage to kill the witness and no one else saw, then that information will not actually be passed on, and you can get away with it as you'd expect. Chocolate cookies. I don't think we have anything in the game made of chocolate, do we? No matches for chocolate. There's only some code in the world gen. Code that mentions cookies. That's a shame. We need more cookies. Yeah, on the assumption that people are satisfied and interested in giving this a go and adding more to it, I'll be very happy to point people in the direction of bits of code that are needed to add the thing that you want. If you want to have a go at trying to add cultist raids or other sort of features to Rtsim, you know, forgotten beasts that walk around the world. That's quite a fun thing I can imagine having, and I don't think it would be particularly difficult to add. So feel free to ping me if you're interested in that. If everybody's asked their questions, I'm going to close it off, I think. I apologise it wasn't a little more organised. I decided to cook my food at the wrong time and ended up with about 2 minutes to spare before this started. Okay.